David Roush, though, he'll be joining us and is joining us right now, a housing expert and the CEO, founder of Pro Tech Building Services out of Dallas. And they've been helping communities from coast to coast with the quality of housing. And certainly a hot topic here for us. David, first off, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. And I know there is a lot. There's a lot to talk about, and there are many different ways to approach this depending on where you are throughout the country. I know for us here, we've talked about and we've dealt with a moratorium on evictions. There have been backed up courts. There have been long waits for evictions. There have been, I think, some real... I think, mishaps when it comes to there's been a pool of money that was set aside that should have been provided or was provided to some landlords, but not enough money here in New York. So certainly a lot of topics. And when we talk about these issues of housing, inflation, these situations still continue. So what are we paying attention to now? And what are we looking at as far as some of those issues that I mentioned and how they are affecting all types of individuals across this whole country?
Well, I think it's important to look at the big picture first, and that is between 2000 and 2018. You know, there were 70 million evictions a year in the country, 70 million evictions, which is 3.6 million per year. And so when the moratoriums came in 20 and 21, you know, that put a stop to the moratorium, put a stop to the evictions. So there was this pent-up demand for evictions hitting at the same time that housing was, you know, soaring in cost.
So where does that leave us now when we're trying to come out of that, where there are a lot of landlords that I think are quite hesitant, I guess, if you will, to either rent or get back involved? And does that leave less housing for individuals? And then are they still sour about the fact that they're not getting that money that they received? And are there renters out there that are still saying, well, I'm not going to pay rent, so what are you going to do to me? Where are we left? And how does that leave the housing market going forward?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is the cost of housing itself is rising so fast. And I'm sure you heard that there's a lot of big venture capital money, investors getting into the purchase of single-family homes and even of entire communities.
Right.
You know, they'll go to a real estate developer, a big builder, and say, I want to buy the whole community to rent it out. As a matter of fact, 25% of all the single-family homes last year were purchased by these types of investors. Now, why are they investing in homes? This is a very unique thing, and it's just occurring in this last 5-10 years. And the reason being is because they understand that there's so much cash that's flooded into the economy that, you know, with inflation coming, that they wanted to find a safe harbor for their assets. So that's one reason that venture capital has been buying up homes. The other reason is because they can buy homes at about 1.5% interest versus, you know, you and I, we pay, you know, at the best of times when 30-year rates were down to 3.5%, we'd pay 5% interest on the mortgage. So they really have an incredible advantage when it comes to housing. So their purchases are also restricting the supply of housing, and it's all about supply and demand. Probably the biggest problem of all, though, in my opinion, is the fact that, you know, to build homes anymore, there's so many restrictions in place. Yeah. California and New York especially.
Right.
Home building has just gotten so difficult. If you look at a home built in California, to build that home costs $600,000-$700,000. The same home to build in Texas or Florida would be $300,000, and that's all basically the cost of regulation.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of issues going on there, and it's one of those things that just can kind of get scary if you're like someone who just really would like to purchase their own home, and it looks like so many things are making that as difficult as possible. And I look back in happier times, I guess, when during the George W. Bush administration, one of his goals was to, I think, get people to have home ownership. Is that part of the American dream was that you had your own home, your own property. And there was an effort to push people to do that. Now, they pushed too hard, and that led to the housing crisis and all sorts of things. But I think the concept, I think it's a very American concept. We all want our home. Now, everything you've described there sounds like it's become more difficult and harder for not only homes to be built, but for people to actually be able to afford their own homes and then be actually able to buy their own homes if all these investors are buying them up to rent them. So essentially, you could have a big market that is just people renting homes and no longer owning them, which to me just is sad when you think about what the American dream is all about. So the setup to my question I'm going to ask is, as the government looks, and you have it in small municipalities and whatnot, they're pushing efforts to create affordable housing, to build these homes so that people can be able to afford them on their own. Yet at the same time, they're allowing investors take over all these housing properties that essentially make it harder and harder for people to get their own homes and get their own housing. Is there anything that the government can do really to try to slow this down? Because it just seems to me it's going to put the American people, the middle class, in a very tight spot.
Yeah, that's a hard question. Ultimately, I don't know what can be done about the venture capital investors buying up homes. I'm not really sure what should be done, if anything. But what really should be done is to make it easier to build homes. Governments, cities, local governments have to understand that every time they put regulations on home building, it increases the cost of the house, and so that's the number one issue. Get government off the back, reduce regulations. There's tremendous amount of regulations on home builders. That's one thing. The other thing is that there needs to be built more condos. There's been an awful lot of apartments built in the last 5-10 years, but condominium construction has fallen, and really condominiums are the most affordable housing option. A lot of young people just getting into jobs and getting into their lives with parenthood, they need an inexpensive first step, and that's condominiums. Mm-hmm. And condominiums have become very difficult to build in the United States because of construction defect litigation. There's a lot of litigation, and that's kind of complicated, but it has to do with all the common area, and that litigation has made developers very leery and hesitant to buy condominiums. So to build condominiums, excuse me. Mm-hmm. So that's the main thing, is that's affordable housing. All the other government affordable housing is just, it's not efficient. You've got to release the market and allow the market, companies to make housing. You can't really rely on government to incentivize the construction of housing.
Yeah. Now, another issue that maybe this is more local, so I wonder in your expertise if you have a sense of how this might occur in other parts of the country. But here in Utica, in upstate New York, central New York, we've got economic development going on in our city here. It's about a population about 60-some thousand or so in Utica.
Mm-hmm. City proper.
And we're building some things going on here under the expectation that it will bring maybe a couple thousand workers here. And so therefore, and there is a housing shortage, I guess, in Utica as well. This is all on a minor scale, but it's what's driving a lot of what we're seeing, a lot of investments in loft apartments, which are a little bit more expensive. They're like $1,000, $2,000 for people to use them. But the the expectation is you're going to have people coming here with high income jobs that'll be able to look for these loft apartments. They don't want a home really. They want to just have a place downtown, whatever it might be. Now, in theory, on paper, that sounds great if it all works out. But are you seeing anywhere where companies that kind of try to project what the needs are going to be and the amount of people that would be available for those, do some of them sometimes overshoot and you have a glut of loft apartments that just aren't enough? There aren't enough people there to be able to afford them.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think almost all home builders really only build, in their pro formas, they build where the jobs are.
Right.
Now, that's their number one criteria to build, because building a home is, or building a subdivision, building a condominium complex is extremely expensive. And the banks after the 2009, banking crisis are very reticent to lend unless that demand is there. So yeah, builders are very, very aware that it's the jobs. They follow jobs. That's the key thing. And going back to what we were talking about too, is one of the big, I was talking about overregulation. One of the big things, and I think you've seen it in New York City, they have what's called rent stabilization, which is another word for rent control.
Right.
The state of California just approved statewide rent control. That's the kind of regulation I'm talking about that just disincentivizes builders to build housing. They're just monkeying with the market system. So that's a huge problem.
Yeah. So, and David, I guess before we let you go, just to, I guess to look at a bigger scope, or look at this from a bigger scope of things. If you had a crystal ball, what do you foresee, or what should we be paying attention to when it comes to the housing market? And I know we mentioned these changes, or the way we could be seeing the housing market change, but what do you think is going to happen here, or what should we be paying attention to? What could possibly happen?
Well, the big picture is that interest rates are rising, and this is the typical 7-10 year cycle where as soon as the Fed starts raising interest rates, home building starts cratering, and that's because people less and less people qualify for that mortgage, whether adjustable or fixed rate mortgage. So, we're in an increasing interest rate environment. In my opinion, and it's just a guess, is that interest rates are going to continue to rise, possibly through next year, if not through the middle of the year. So as long as interest rates are rising, the purchase of housing, the housing market is going to decline. And but as soon as that turns around, then the market will pick back up again. But again, it's based on jobs. Housing goes where the jobs are. If you look at Texas and Florida and Arizona, those markets are absolutely hyperinflated just because there's so much demand for housing that the home builders can't keep up. I think the number one market in the nation the last couple of years has been Phoenix, Arizona, believe it or not, followed by San Diego. And so there, the supply is constrained, but the demand is extremely high. But interest rates, if you want to follow the housing market, just follow interest rates.
Yeah. And David, before we let you go, I know you help out folks in many different parts of the housing industry. If they have needs or if they have services that they are looking for, you can do that at ProTech. How do folks find out more about you and your company?
Well, just protec.com, protec.com. And, we maintain communities in California and Nevada, but we also help developers throughout the United States by writing their HOA maintenance manuals that shows the board of directors what to maintain, when, and how. And builders are very busy right now. Even though interest rates are rising, they're busy. But you can see that their activity is starting to taper off with the rising interest rates.
Sure. Yeah, certainly. David, we thank you for your time and your expertise here this morning. Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and take care.